All right, everybody. Let's dive into something a little bit different today. A system that's so complicated, so quirky, it makes your average escape room look like a walk in the park.
Sounds intriguing.
We're talking about the Electoral College.
Ah, yes. The Electoral College, not exactly known for its simplicity.
But I promise you, once you understand the ins and outs, it's actually pretty fascinating. And that's what we're here for.
Absolutely.
We've got this amazing government white paper. It's from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and it's going to be our guide today.
Excellent. A primary source.
We're going to try to make you, dear listener, an Electoral College whiz.
We're going to take you all the way back to the beginning.
Like powdered wigs and all.
Powdered wigs and all to the founding fathers.
Because believe it or not, the way we elect presidents today is surprisingly similar to how they did it back in 1787.
It's true. The framers of the Constitution grappled with this very question of how to choose a president.
And they had a lot of things to consider.
They did imagine a brand new nation.
Just figuring things out.
Yeah. Travel was by horse and buggy news, spread at a snail's pace, and the idea of a national popular vote for president.
I don't think they even had Twitter back then.
Not quite.
They were fresh off a revolution against the king.
Exactly. They were wary of centralized power.
The last thing they wanted was to concentrate too much power in one place.
Whether it was Congress or in the hands of, quote unquote, the average Joe, as the white paper puts it.
So direct popular vote was out. Congress picking the president felt a little too kingmaker-ish.
They needed a system that balanced the interests of both the people and the states.
And thus the Electoral College was born.
This ingenious compromise aimed to bridge the gap between those competing concerns.
So how does this grand compromise actually work?
Well, in a nutshell,
Let's break it down.
each state gets a certain number of electors
Based on
how many representatives they have in Congress.
which is determined by
Their population.
So it's like a weighted system.
Exactly, giving more populous states a louder voice in the election.
So when you go and you cast your vote on Election Day, you're not actually voting directly for the president.
You're actually voting for a slate of electors
Who are pledged to support.
your chosen candidate.
Gotcha.
And in most states, it's a winner-take-all system. Meaning whoever wins the popular vote in that state, even by a tiny margin, snags all of its electoral votes.
That's why we see those red and blue maps on election night.
Right. The candidates are battling it out for those precious swing states.
Trying to get those electoral votes.
Exactly.
But hold on a second. There are a couple of rebels in the mix.
You're talking about Maine and Nebraska?
Maine and Nebraska, they decided to do things a little differently.
They use a proportional system
Where
electoral votes can actually be split between candidates.
So even if a candidate loses the state overall,
They can still pick up a few electoral votes if they win in certain districts.
and then this has happened.
It has, like in 2008 when Obama won an electoral vote from Nebraska despite losing the state to McCain.
So it just goes to show every vote can count.
Even in the seemingly predictable world of the Electoral College.
Now, all this talk of electors and votes might make it seem like a smooth sailing system.
You might think so,
But hold your horses, because the Electoral College has a history that's wilder than a rodeo clown on roller skates.
buckle up. We're about to delve into some of the most dramatic and controversial moments in Electoral College history.
Starting with the election of 1800.
This one's a real nail-biter.
Picture this: Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr,
End up in a dead heat.
tied in the Electoral College.
Can you imagine the tension?
Back then, they didn't have instant results and 24/7 news coverage.
It took weeks for the news to travel and for the votes to be tallied,
The election went to the House of Representatives.
where it took a whopping 36 ballots to finally declare Jefferson the winner.
36 ballots.
They must have been drinking gallons of coffee to stay awake for that one.
Talk about a nail-biter.
That electoral drama was the catalyst for a major change,
It led to the 12th Amendment.
which separated the votes for president and vice president.
So you no longer had the top two vote-getters potentially becoming president and vice president, even if they're from opposing parties.
This is how we got the running mate system we know today.
So thanks to the 12th Amendment, no more presidential-vice presidential ties.
At least not in the Electoral College.
But even with that patch, the Electoral College's journey has been anything but smooth sailing.
Oh, not at all. In fact, it's had its fair share of bumps and bruises along the way.
Fast forward to 1876, and we've got another head-scratcher.
Samuel Tilden wins the popular vote.
But loses the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes.
It was a constitutional crisis triggered by disputed electors and some serious political wheeling and dealing.
Wait, what? How is that even possible?
Some states sent different sets of electors claiming different winners.
leading to a showdown that ultimately landed in the hands of a specially formed electoral commission.
And this commission decided to hand the victory to Hayes by a single electoral vote.
Talk about a close call.
This controversy led to the creation of the safe harbor deadline, which requires states to resolve any election disputes by a certain date to avoid potential chaos in future elections.
So it's a legacy that still impacts us today.
It certainly does.
So it's not just about winning the popular vote.
It's about winning the right combination of states and their electors.
And, as we'll see, the Electoral College has a knack for throwing curveballs even when you think you've got it all figured out.
It's a system that keeps us on our toes, that's for sure.
We were just talking about the 1876 election and how the guy who won the popular vote didn't become president.
Right, a real political head-scratcher.
That's got to be so frustrating for the voters, right?
It certainly raises questions about the relationship between the popular vote and the Electoral College.
Like you show up at a party and they're like, sorry, guest list is full.
And you're thinking, but I RSVP'd?
Exactly.
It highlights that the Electoral College isn't just about counting individual votes. It's about winning states to secure those electoral votes.
And it's not like that was the only time it happened, right?
Oh, no, not at all. The white paper actually mentions another instance just a few years later.
Oh, really?
1888, Grover Cleveland won the popular vote.
Huh?
He lost to Benjamin Harrison in the Electoral College.
How does that even?
It all boiled down to the distribution of votes across states.
So even though Cleveland won the popular vote overall,
Harrison strategically won key states by narrow margins, while Cleveland racked up big wins in others that didn't translate into enough electoral votes.
it's like playing a game of capture the flag where some flags are worth more points.
Exactly. You could have a ton of flags, but still lose if your opponent grabs the high-value ones.
Oh, that's a good analogy. I like that. And this brings us to something a lot of people are going to remember.
A much more recent example,
2000 Bush versus Gore.
the Florida recount.
Oh, man, that was a nail-biter.
Played out on live television legal battles, recounts, hanging chads, you name it.
It felt like an episode of a political thriller.
And yet again, the popular vote winner didn't end up in the Oval Office.
Al Gore.
It all came down to a handful of contested votes in a single state, Florida.
Highlighting the immense power a single state can wield in this system.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've established that the Electoral College keeps things interesting, to say the least.
It definitely keeps us on our toes.
But here's a question that's been bugging me. We've been talking about these electors, right?
Right. The individuals chosen to represent their state in the Electoral College.
Are they actually bound to vote the way their state did?
Ah, you're talking about the faithless elector.
Faithless elector? What is that?
It's an elector who, for whatever reason, decides to cast their electoral vote for someone other than the candidate who won their state.
Wait, they could just do that?
It's happened a handful of times throughout history.
Seriously? That seems kind of undemocratic, doesn't it?
It's a quirk of the system that's sparked a lot of debate and legal challenges.
So has a faithless elector ever actually, swung an election?
Thankfully, no. Their votes have never been the deciding factor in a presidential race.
But it could happen.
It's a possibility that looms over every election, especially those that are particularly close.
It's like this wild card just waiting to be played.
It would certainly throw the system into uncharted territory.
Okay, so we've got tied elections, disputed electors, rogue electors. What else could possibly go wrong?
Well, the white paper actually mentions another wild scenario. What if a candidate dies before they even make it to Inauguration Day?
Oh, no, don't even say that.
It's a morbid thought, but it's happened before, and it highlights some of the system's most perplexing what-ifs.
Okay, I'm morbidly curious. Spill the beans. What happens if a candidate for president passes away during the election process?
Let's go back in time to 1872.
Okay.
A candidate named Horace Greeley was running against Ulysses S. Grant.
Okay.
Greeley unfortunately passed away after the popular vote, but before the Electoral College could meet.
Oh, wow. Talk about a curveball.
The electors who were pledged to Greeley ended up scattering their votes among other candidates.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, it didn't change the outcome. Grant was already the clear winner. But it did expose this vulnerability in the system.
So what if he had actually won the popular vote and then passed away?
That's the real constitutional conundrum.
Would we have had a ghost president?
Not quite a ghost president, but it would have triggered a constitutional crisis.
Yeah. So what would have happened?
Well, the white paper lays out 3 distinct scenarios.
3?
Each with its own set of rules and potential for chaos.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay it on me.
It all depends on when exactly the candidate passes away.
Okay, so scenario 1.
The candidate wins the popular vote, but dies before the Electoral College meets in December.
Okay.
In that case, the political parties can technically nominate a replacement.
Okay.
But there's a catch. They can't force the electors to actually vote for that person.
So the electors could just go rogue and choose somebody totally different.
Exactly. Imagine the pressure those electors would be under.
Oh, man, that is a lot of pressure.
Mm.
Okay, so that's scenario 1. What about scenario 2?
Scenario 2 is if the candidate wins the election but passes away after the Electoral College votes, but before Congress can officially count those votes in January.
Okay, that seems like a pretty specific window of time.
It is, and it presents some unique challenges.
Like what?
Well, Congress would be faced with a few options.
Let's hear them.
They could count the votes as cast, essentially electing a deceased president.
Hold on, you're saying a candidate who is no longer living could still technically become president?
It's theoretically possible.
Wow, okay, what's the other option?
They could choose to invalidate all the votes for the deceased candidate.
And then what?
It would throw the entire election into disarray. Imagine the legal battles and political turmoil that would ensue.
Talk about a constitutional crisis. Okay, let's move on to scenario 3 before I have a panic attack.
Scenario 3 is what happens if the president-elect passes away after Congress counts the votes, but before Inauguration Day.
Okay, so this is like the home stretch.
Exactly, and thankfully this one's a bit more straightforward.
Thank goodness.
The vice president-elect would simply take over as president on Inauguration Day.
So, a bit of normalcy amidst all the potential chaos.
Exactly. But as we've seen, the Electoral College has a knack for throwing curveballs. Even in seemingly straightforward situations, there's always room for the unexpected,
It's like one of those choose-your-own-adventure books.
where every page has the potential to lead to a completely different ending.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, folks. We've seen how the Electoral College came to be, how it's supposed to work,
Yeah.
and some of the times where it went totally off the rails.
We've explored its history, its mechanics, its controversies.
And it's a system that's been praised, criticized, and everything in between.
But ultimately, it's a testament to the framers' vision that it has survived for over 200 years.
But it also raises so many questions.
About fairness representation, the very nature of our democracy.
So where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question. Isn't it? Is the Electoral College a brilliant system that stood the test of time? Or is it a relic of the past that's ripe for reform?
Stay tuned, folks, because we'll be diving into that very question in our final segment. Welcome back to the final round of our Electoral College deep dive. We've been through a lot,
We have, haven't we?
dodging faithless electors, leaping over dead candidates.
It's been a journey.
It really has.
Yeah.
Before the break, we were left hanging on this question.
What happens if a candidate
Wins the election,
and then decides they want
Peace
to
out.
resign?
resign. Yeah, like, I don't want this job anymore. I'm going to go live on a deserted island.
It has happened before, not with a deserted island, but
Did we-
1973 Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned.
Oh, yeah, amidst a scandal.
Right, and that's where the 25th Amendment comes in.
The 25th Amendment. I feel like we haven't even talked about that.
It allows the president to appoint a new VP,
With
Congress's approval, of course.
So that's how Ford became VP.
Exactly.
And then when Nixon resigned,
Ford became president.
it's like musical chair.
It is a bit like musical chairs, but the 25th Amendment was designed for these kinds of unexpected vacancies.
But it's mostly been used for, like, planned successions, right?
Yeah, like when a president has to temporarily hand over power for medical reasons.
Okay, interesting. So it's there just in case. But let's get back to the Electoral College itself. We've talked about a lot of the quirks and controversies.
We have.
But the white paper mentions some potential vulnerabilities in the system, too.
Yeah.
What are those all about?
Well, one concern is the possibility of a tie
In the
Electoral College.
Oh, yeah.
It happened in 1800.
And that's why we have the 12th Amendment.
Exactly. But there's always a chance it could happen again. We could end up with two candidates deadlocked at 269 votes each.
And if that happens,
The election goes to the House of Representatives,
each state gets one vote.
and they have to pick a winner from the top three candidates.
Can you imagine the pressure?
The fate of the nation resting on their shoulders.
It's not just a hypothetical either. There have been elections decided by just a handful of electoral votes.
Exactly. It wouldn't take much for a tie to throw the whole system into chaos.
It makes you wonder, are there any ways to, like, reform the Electoral College, make it better?
There are a lot of ideas out there. Some people propose proportional allocation of electoral votes. Others advocate for a national popular vote system.
But wouldn't you need to, like, amend the Constitution for that?
You would. Any changes to the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment.
And it's not easy.
Not at all. It requires a supermajority vote in both houses of Congress and then ratification by 3/4 of the states.
So it's a long shot.
It's a long and winding road, but there's always room for discussion and debate.
Yeah.
The Electoral College has evolved over time, and it's possible we'll see more changes in the future.
The framers were pretty smart. They knew they weren't creating a perfect system.
They built in mechanisms for amendment and adaptation, recognizing that the needs of the nation might change.
Right. They knew things might need to be tweaked down the line. So the Electoral College, it's a living, breathing institution, just like our democracy itself.
Messy, complicated, constantly evolving.
But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the beauty of it all.
It forces us to engage in these discussions, to weigh different perspectives, and ultimately decide for ourselves what kind of democracy we want to have.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our Electoral College deep dive.
It's been a pleasure diving in with you.
We've explored the history, the mechanics, the controversies. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more informed, a little bit more engaged.
And ready to participate in the ongoing conversation about the future of our democracy.
Absolutely. Because knowledge is power. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. The story of the Electoral College and of American democracy itself is still being written.
Very true.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, folks.